Hi everyone. So in today's session you're going to be looking at the more advanced formulae from Microsoft Excel, in particular looking at conditional arguments there. And this really covers some of the more valuable parts of Excel and data analysis that we'll be expanding later on into actual programming logic and in the Python programming language. But doing it first of all in Excel will give you something that you can get a handle on and could be quite valuable for you later on. So just as an outline, we're going to be looking at conditional summaries of data. So the sum if, count if and average if functions, adding conditional logic from if statements, and then modifying text. So right, left and middle functions and the concatenate function. Now if I had to summarize the sort of three core functions that I end up using all the time in Excel that have saved me hours and hours of work, those would be the sum if, count if, and concatenate functions. Okay, they're immensely powerful and valuable and often underutilized in Excel. So we're going to be using the formulae tab in general here. The examples I'm going to talk through the slides, and then you'll be able to go through the activities, pause at the right point, go through the activities in the right data files that you can download from the team site. A couple of them I post in the solutions as well for you to go through, just to make sure that at the end you can check that you're on the right patch. And then there's a case study for you to work on if you finish all of that. So this table, which it goes over multiple slides really, it summarizes the functions that are covered in this lesson. And it really is just a bit of a whistle-stop tour. We're not going to go into too much detail, and it's just a simple explanation, an example, and then moving on. So we've got the sums and the counting and averaging, but you only want to sum if certain criteria are met. So you want to add up people's salaries to work out the average salary. Maybe you want to do it that way, but you only want to take account of people who are currently in employment. Or you want to count people who are unemployed and see what the unemployment figures are like. Then we move on to more structural things, so being able to look up data that meets certain criteria and be able to return that information from a set table. So you've got a data table with loads of information in, but you only need to get specific bits back. For that, you'd want to use the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP functions. And then we've got some logic functions like the if statement. So if this thing is met, then do this. Otherwise, do this. The and or are also used for logic operations. And then we start to get some of these terms and functions for modifying text. So the left, right, middle, just getting parts of a series of text. So if you've got someone's name and you only want to get the first 3 or 4 letters of that, so code them into your organization's customer resource management system or CRM. Or maybe you want the first part of their details to create a client email address for them. So we're going to start with conditional summaries of data, so sum if and count if and average if functions. Now conditional formulas add another dimension to data analysis by summarizing data that meets one or more criteria. That could be a number or text or an expression, and it tests which cells you should add up or count or average. So they fall into these 3 broad categories: sum if, so add them up if you meet certain criteria. Then there's the count if, count how many there are that meet this criteria. And then the average if, so based on if they meet the criteria, calculate the mean or the average of those. And there's an extension to these in Excel where you can have multiple different criteria for when you're adding up or counting or averaging. Don't worry if you're not feeling too confident on this. We'll talk through each of these in a bit more detail, but also you'll see an example of them applied to data and see what the outcome is there. So the sum if function calculates the total of only those cells that meet a given criterion or condition. The syntax of the function is just the sum if, the thing that you want to add up, what the criteria is, and then that you want to make sure that you're adding that all up properly. So the values that a function uses to perform operations or calculations in a function formula are called arguments. So the arguments would be the range, criteria, and the sum range. So look at the range of data. see if that meets the criteria, and then add it up if it does. So, step-by-step use of the sum function. Those three criteria that we've got, the range criteria and the sum range, the three arguments that we want to use are listed out here. So if you open up the Fabricam sales file, and first of all, save that as the new file that we want to end up with. I'm a terrible person for doing this, but honestly, giving a file a name is the first thing you should always do. Go then to cell H5, and then you want to do a sum if function. You can collapse the dialog button to try and get the range argument for you, but in essence you want to get that dialog box up so that you can see what's going on. And the range that we're going to look at is cells C5 to 16 that you need to select there. So that's the range of cells that we're going to check if they meet our criteria. And then our specific criteria is values greater than 200,000. So we only want to add up things if the values are in column C are greater than 200,000. So once we've done that, we can see that it's going to look, roughly speaking, like this, give or take what version of Excel you're on. So we can see that there's a conditional sum happening, and it's only adding up the values that are greater than 200,000. So we're going to see what that total is of the large sales. And this is often really important for businesses to try and understand and break up their customer base to try and see who are their most expensive and valuable customers, and how much are they worth, and how much are the lower range customers worth. And in often cases, you may have lots and lots more customers who spend less money with you. So the portion less than $200,000 here could be far more valuable to the business and make up 90% of the business's income, but they still care about the amount of people that are making them more than $200,000. So once you've done that, hit OK, and it should all add up to the value that was on the previous slide. Now, if we move on to cell H6, the one underneath, and then in the function library group again, click recently used and sum if again. Now we're going to select cells E5 to 16. In the criterion box, type less than 3%. And then in the sum range field, highlight cells C5 to 16. So what we're going to be doing is looking at column E and seeing which of those values in column E are less than 3%. And then we're going to be counting up how much they made us. Then click OK. And when you do that, your total should come up to $1,134,200. So there we've seen that you can have a sum if function based just looking at a column of data, and then also looking at a column of data with a criterion on that, so the 3%, and then adding up values from a different column of data. Save the workbook and leave Excel. And now we're going to move on to the sum ifs function. So the sum if function lets you have one criterion, but sometimes we've got much more complex data and we need to understand and constrain that even more. So we've got the sum ifs function for that. So in sum ifs, the sum range is the first argument, so what you want to add up if all of your different criteria are met. So we're going to use two sum ifs formula. The first formula adds the selling price of the properties that Fabricam sold for more than $200,000 and that were on the market 60 days or less. So we've got two criteria here, more than 200,000 and less than 60 days on the market. The second formula is going to add the properties that sold at less than 3% difference from their listed price within 60 days as well. So our core shared criteria is 60 days. Now, yes, you could filter the data a couple of times and get this to show, but we want a conditional summation and a summary statistic that's telling us what's going on in that data, so that if subtle bits change in the data set, if we find out later there's errors in that, our formulae auto-update. So if you go to cell H7, go to the sumIfs function, and then in the function arguments, the sum range is C5 to 16 again. And then in criterion range 1, we're going to select cells F5 to 16 and type less than or equal to 60, less than or equal to 60 days. In criteria range 2, select cells C5 to 16 and type greater than 200,000, because this is our first sumIfs function we're doing. Hit enter, and it should return a value of $742,000. So this is sales greater than 200,000 within the last 60 days. Our second sumIfs function is going to be based on the percentage value. So we've got a sumIfs. Again, our sum range is going to be C5 to 16. We need to look at F, column F, to see whether or not it's been sold within the last 60 days. And then we can look at cells in column E, E5 to 16, where we type less than 3% again, and we can see that the dialog box should look like this. Click OK, and after applying, the total should be 433,000. Okay. Hopefully you're all comfortable with that, but if not, pause the video, go back, watch it again, do the exercise, and compare your implementation to the solution I've given you. Now, sumIf and sumIfs are adding up values. COUNTIF is just counting how many times something happens. And it works in the same structure as the sumIf and the sumIfs function. So we're going to use the COUNTIF function here to calculate the number of homes sold and listed at greater than $200,000. So go to cell H9 in the same file. You can look at more functions and statistical, or just start typing COUNTIF. And in the range box, we're going to look at B5 to B16. In the criteria box, type greater than 200,000 and hit tab. And then click OK. So we've set the criterion values greater than or equal to 200,000 and only count them if that's the case. And Excel will return a value of 9. Now we're going to move on to H10 and use another COUNTIF function. We're going to look at C5 to 16, and then we're going to look at typing the criterion of greater than 200,000 again. You can preview the result, and that should be a value of 7 this time, so less meet this criterion. Now COUNTIF just has one criterion that you're checking. You can have multiple criterion using the COUNTIFs function. So count how many times something happened if it meets criteria 1, criteria 2, criteria 3, etc. Now you can have up to 27 different ranges and criteria, okay? So that's an awful lot of fine-grained detail you can get there. So using the workbook from the same exercise as previously again, go to cell H11 and we're going to do a COUNTIFs function. So in the function argument box, the criteria range is going to be F5 to 16. Criteria 1 box, type greater than or equal to 60. So this is properties that have been on the market a while. When you've done this, you should end up with a value of 8. Okay, so your dialog box and everything should look like this. In criteria range 2, select cells E5 to 16 and then type greater than or equal to 5%. and then press tab and click OK. And that will return a value of 2. So we've got 2 criterion here, greater than 60 days and greater than or equal to 5% that are being checked before something is counted. Now it's important to say that if you're looking at empty cells, COUNTIFs treats it as a 0 value. It doesn't count up empty cells. It only counts cells with values that meet the criterion. Now, if you're comfortable with SUMIF and COUNTIF, AVERAGEIF is going to be absolutely fine for you as well. In essence, AVERAGEIF is just the same as a SUMIF divided by a COUNTIF. Okay, because the average in Excel is just when you add them up and divide by how many there are. So the terminology for this and the arguments of the function are, for AVERAGEIF, are range, so what you want to check, criterion, see that it meets that in the range, and then look at the average range, what you're actually going to average. So for example, in this exercise, we're going to use the AVERAGEIF function to calculate the average number of days that properties valued at $200,000 or more were on the market before they were sold. So the range in the formula is B5 to 16, i.e. the listed value of the homes that were sold. The criterion is the condition against which you want the sales to be evaluated, so that's greater than or equal to $200,000. And then the average range is the ones cells that you actually want to average. That's the number of days. So we're going to jump the same workbook into cell H12. We're going to use the average function, but from the average group, we're going to use AVERAGEIF. So in the number box 1, type B5 to 16 and click OK. Select H13 and then in the function library, go to insert a function and insert the AVERAGEIF function. So in the function arguments dialog box, in the range box, put in B5 to 16, in the criterion box, greater than or equal to 200,000. And then in the average range box, you select cells F5 to 16. So that will be the days, number of days that they're on. And then hit tab to get a preview. And Excel should tell you 63.33. So the average number of days that a property greater than $200,000 in value was on the market was 63.33 days. So that's the AVERAGEIF function. AVERAGEIFs works the same way that SUMIFs and COUNTIFs do. We've got multiple different criteria now from which we're going to calculate our average. So AVERAGEIF formula returns the average, the arithmetic mean, of all cells that meet multiple criterion. And the syntax for it, so the arguments are going to be the average range, criterion range 1, criteria 1, criteria range 2, criteria 2, whatever the criteria range is that we're going to check against the criteria. And you'll learn to apply the AVERAGEIF formula in the following exercise. So go to cell H14 and then you're going to insert the AVERAGEIFs function. So select that, and in the function arguments, in the average range, look at cells F5 to 16. In criterion range 1, select cells B5 to 16, and then in the criteria 1 box, go less than 200,000. Then we need to set our second criterion. So select cells E5 to 16, and criteria 2 box, go less than or equal to 5%. Save and leave the workbook. So it should return a value of 60. So you've entered only 2 criteria in the SUMIFs, COUNTIFs and AVERAGEIFs function. Remember that you can have up to 127 conditional arguments in there. So much flexibility that we haven't really demonstrated here, but by using 2, you can see how they extend quite easily. Some general points. If average range is omitted, the function arguments the range is used. If a cell in average range is an empty cell, then average if just ignores it. So it doesn't add a 0 and it just ignores it. Okay. If there's text or other data in there that shouldn't be added up, then it will break as a function and return the hash div over 0. Okay. So if you get that showing in a cell, you know that you've got data in there that's being treated as text or not being looked at properly. So now we're going to move on to the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP function. So being able to have a data table in one spreadsheet, and then in different sheets, then you're going to be able to pull data out from those tables in other sheets, so that you can present it in a much nicer way from a more complex data set that's just housed within the same file. 99% of the time you'll be using a HLOOKUP. Very rarely you might need to use a VLOOKUP. But just because of the way that tables work and the way that we humanly structure data, VLOOKUP is their natural go-to. So the V in VLOOKUP stands for vertical. The formula is used when the comparison value is in the first column of a table. Excel goes down the first column until it finds the match for the argument that it's looking for, and then goes to the right of that value to find what you're asking it to return in the same row. I'm going to jump to an example here because I think it's much better to do that rather than try and explain it with words. So if we were trying to look up from this table, which has columns years in Fabricam, individual bonus, and back office bonus, if we wanted to see, based on how long someone had been at Fabricam, what their back office bonus should be, so what their percentage raise should be on their salary, we do a VLOOKUP function, and we're going to look up 5 being the 5 years, and then we're going to look that up in the table which has been named commission, so grouped and named, and then we're going to get the value back from the third column of that table. So this is the table in yellow called commission. We're looking up the value 5, and we want to return the back office bonus, so that's the third column there. That would be 1.5% that should be returned. So table array is a table of text or numbers or values that you use with a formula. It can either be a range of cells or a range name. So in the next exercise, you're going to use a VLOOKUP function. So go to the Fabricam bonus file and save it as Fabricam bonus solution. Once you've got the performance sheet active, select cells A15 to C20 in the worksheet and click to define the name of them. Call that bonus so that we've got a table named that we can refer to. Click cell E5 and you want to look up the VLOOKUP function in there. So, or you can just start typing equals VLOOKUP, open brackets, and then it will start to run you through them. So in the lookup value text box, type B5 and then hit tab. Then we need to move onto the table array. Now we've just defined what the table is called. We've called it bonus. So we're just going to look that up. That's the table from which we're going to look for the value in B5. And then we're going to tell it what information we need back out from that table. So we're going to get the second column out from that table for bonus being the value that's in B5. So we type 2. Now, the last argument is generally optional, but typically you just want to put true in here. That means if it's not got the exact match, it will look for the nearest value. So putting that all together, it should look like this as the dialog box. So look at value, we're looking up the value in B5. We're then looking up that value in the bonus table. we're going to return the second column value if it finds the value that's in B5 there, which is 12 here. And we've told it the true for the last argument. So this slide just talks through amending that. To go, instead of getting the second column of information, we need to get the third column of information. Okay. Once you've finished, copy the formula down from F5 to F6 to 11. And then you've got that automatically generating and finding the data from your table called bonus into this other table that you're working on. And this is hopefully you're getting a flavour of the power that you've got here in terms of automating data analysis through these functions. Now, H in HLOOKUP just stands for horizontal. If you're comfortable with VLOOKUP, then HLOOKUP is exactly the same, but just turned on its side. So if we wanted to get a value for feet, for instance, from this table of different properties here in yellow, and we wanted to get the third row of that being returned, then it might be looking like this. HLOOKUP, the value we're looking up is feet from the list of properties in that table, and then return the third row. Okay. Feel free to pause the video to read these steps to talk through the HLOOKUP function, but if you're comfortable with VLOOKUP, as I say, then HLOOKUP won't be a challenge for you at all. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is conditional logic. So this is looking for whether or not a condition is true or false, and then you can react based on that. So you can use the and or functions to create conditional formulae that result in logical value. But beyond that, you've also got the if statement. So the result of a conditional formula is determined by the state of a specific condition or the answer to a logical question. An if function sets up this conditional statement to test data. And the way that it's set up is shown in this fourth bullet point here. So if, and then do a logical test to see if something's true or false. If it's true, return a value or do something. If it's false, return a different value or do something else. And this sort of, for me, is one of those top 10 functions that I'm always using in Excel. So in this exercise, we're going to use the if function to determine who's achieved their goal and whether or not they're eligible for the performance bonus. So if you go to the performance worksheet tab to make it the active worksheet, and then click on cell G5, and you can either click on logical and go to if, or just start typing if. So what we're going to do is check that if the value in cell D5 is greater than or equal to the value in C5. We'll be comparing targets with actuals. So this component of the formula determines whether they've met their sales goal. If that's true, we want to return yes, and if it's false, we want to return no. So if the value if true box, in the value if true box, type yes, and in the value if false box, type no. So that's all finished. Now with G5 selected, use the fill handle to copy the formula to G6 to G12. Excel returns the result that 3 agents earned their performance award by displaying yes in their cells, and you should see the same happening for you. In cell H5, type a more complex function, what we're going to do here. So type equals if G5 is equal to yes, then we're going to do E5 times D5. So that's going to calculate what their bonus should be. and then there's comma 0 and close bracket. Now before you complete the formula, notice the screen tip to the cells selected and the colours. So you can move the mouse pointer to each of the arguments and they become a hyperlink. E5 is the individual bonus rate and D5 is the actual sales. So the bonus is the rate times the sales, i.e. if they've sold loads and loads over their target, they're going to get a bigger bonus. Hit enter to complete the formula. And you can click cell H5 and use the fill handle to copy the formula all the way down. Now in I5, we're going to do another step. We're going to type equals if G12 is a yes, F5 times D5, and then hit enter. Copy this down from I5 all the way to I6 to 11. So you'll notice that Richard Carey, the senior partner, did not receive an agent bonus and there was no bonus for back office there. So the final pending sale of $700,000 for the year came through. So what we're going to do is edit the data. So in D5, type $3.9 million. Notice that H5 and the amounts in column I go from 0 to bonuses. And again, hopefully you're getting a flavour for the automation that's possible in here using these conditional arguments. So the next logical thing we're going to look at is the AND function. So the AND function returns true if all its arguments are true, and false if at least one or more are false. So the syntax of that is AND, and then logical test 1, logical test 2, logical test 3, etc. So in this exercise, you're going to use the AND function to determine whether Fabricam's total annual sales met the strategic goal and whether the sales goal exceeded the previous year's sales. So click the Annual Sales Worksheet tab, click the Formulas tab, go to B6 and use the AND operation. So we're going to look at whether or not B16 being greater than or equal to B3 and then hit enter. So that's the first condition. So did the actual sales equal or exceed the sales goal? Because it's the first year, only one logical test is entered. Then we're going to select cell C6, click the recently used button, and then click the AND. In the logical box 1, type C16 greater than or equal to C3. So your logical box should look like this for the AND function. We've got two logicals inserted there. So if you click OK and then copy the formula from C6 to then D6 all the way to F6 and then save the workbook. Now the AND function checks two or more statements and sees if everything is true. It returns true, or if any of them are false, it returns a false. The OR statement is kind of the opposite of that. So if one thing is true, and even then if the other thing is false, it will still return true. So it's looking for just one thing meeting your criteria. So in this exercise, you'll create a formula that evaluates whether sales agents are eligible for the back office bonus when they are new or when they did not get the sales bonus, so less than 4 years with the company, or didn't get the agent bonus. So go to the Performance Worksheet tab again, go to J5 and go to the OR function from the logical group. So in logical 1 box, type B5 less than 4 and then hit tab for the duration of the time that they've been with the organisation. And then in the logical box 2, type G5 equals no and then hit tab. So this will answer the second question, did Richard Carey not achieve the sales goal? hit OK, and then select J5 and copy the formula all the way along to J6 all the way through J11. So J7 is the first one that's got a true value. To see each of the arguments, click cell J7 and then click the insert function button, and we'll return the function arguments dialog box. Save the workbook. So the next thing we're going to look at is about using formulae to modify text. So imagine if you've got a cell that's got some text in there and you need to modify or get some portion of that. So we're going to look at particular functions like proper, upper, lower, left, right and mid. So you can use the convert text to columns wizard to separate simple cell content such as first names and last names into different columns. Okay, we've got an example of that on the next slide. So here we can see we've got all sorts of data in each of these cells, in A2, A3, A4. It's all just in a single cell, and we need to get that spread over multiple different columns. So we need some data in A, some in B, some in C, some in D, and then we've got it all split out, and we can work with that then. So we're going to convert text to columns using one of Excel's handy built-in operators. So if you select cells A2 to A8, click on the Data tab and then click Text to Columns. And then there's a little wizard box that opens up and starts to go through data. Now you have to tell it what the delimiter is. Remember yesterday we were talking about CSV files where we had delimiters being the comma. Well, here the delimiter is going to be a space. Okay? Or it could be the comma, depending on what your data is doing. Once you've selected the comma in there, then your data is going to be spread over all the different columns. Okay, doing things like this can be really, really useful if your data is a bit of a mess whenever you're doing any data analysis. And it can take you longer to code something like this up in Python or Java than it can to just do it quickly in Excel before you even do your data import. So once you've got your text sorted into columns, maybe you just need the first 3 initials of someone's name or some of that information. So you can use, for instance, the left function. This looks at a string or some text and just gets the first few characters specified by the num characters or numchars argument inside the function. So the left of the cell that's got the text and how many characters you want. So if you use the workbook from the previous exercise, click on cell H1 and type the extension. And then in I1, type the floor to label the columns. Select cell H2, and then we're going to use the left function from the text library. Okay. Once the function argument box opens, we can get to work. So in the text box, click A2 and then press tab. In the numchars box, type 3. The preview should show you 425. Click OK and then double click to be able to drag that down all the way from H2 to H3 all the way through H8. Okay, and then do the same in I2, but you only want 1 character this time, just the first character. And then save the workbook. Now where left gets the first few characters from a function or a cell, right gets the last few characters. You just have to tell it how many to do. So if we are looking at the birthday section, so click cell J1 and then type birthday. In cell K1, type employer ID to label the columns. Now select J2. Click the Formulas tab, and then the function library group, click Text and choose Write. Choose as for the text box, choose E2, and then in the numcars box, type 3, and then hit Tab. Drag that down from J2 all the way to J8. Now then if you go to cell K2, type Write A2 5, and then press Enter. So that's really quite simple, the write function. If you're comfortable with left and right, then you'll be okay hopefully with mid. So left and right go for like the first few or the last few characters. The mid function just gets you some of the middle values. So you tell it where to start in the text and how many characters to get. So if you go to cell L1 and type mcat1, and then go in cell M1 and type empcat2. So employee category 1 and 2. Then in cell L2, use the mid function. And what we're going to do is look at the fourth character of this data here from A2. So the data is 425 OONP 15210. So we're going to get the fourth character, that's going to be our start num. And then the numcars is going to be 2. We're just going to do 2 characters from that, starting at position 4. So you should see 00. Once you've done that, drag that down from M2 all the way to M8. Now sometimes there are extra spaces in a cell, either at the end or the beginning of a string, especially after converting a text file like the alarm file. So we can use the trim function to remove characters at both ends of a text string. There's only one argument, text, so it'll do the work for you. So if you go to cell N1 and then in cell O1 type last, click cell N2 and then use the trim function and trim cell B2. Okay, and you'll see that that's doing some trimming work for us there, where it's returning David. Then click OK and drag that down from N3 all the way to N8. And then if you move on from N to O and O2, use trim of C2 and drag that down as well. And you'll see the effect that's having. So next up we've got the proper function, and this capitalizes the first letter of text string and any of the other letters in that text that follow any character other than a letter. So in a proper text syntax or function argument, text can be text enclosed in quotation marks, or a formula that returns specific text, or a reference to a cell that's got that text in. So in this exercise we'll use proper to change lowercase text to initial capitals. So if you go to cell A11 and type first, in cell B11 type last, and then in cell C11 type birthday. And if you apply heading 3 to these cells, then if you go to A12, so underneath our first one, then click the Formulas tab and use text and proper. The function arguments dialog box opens then. So in the text box, click N2. You see that David is converted to David with a capital D. And click OK and copy the formula in A12 all the way from A12 to B18, so that you've got both first and last columns. Select cell C12, type equals proper J2, and then hit enter. Copy that down 13 to 18. Now, other functions that can be useful is the upper one, which allows you to convert text to uppercase. This is quite straightforward if you're comfortable with the proper function, so I'll just move on to the exercise here. And if you're happy with the upper function, the lower won't be a problem either. That just converts text from uppercase to lowercase. So next we've got concatenate. So in some cases you need to combine text strings together. So use the concatenate function for this purpose. So you concatenate text 1 to text 2 to text 3, and all it does is just joins them all together. So if you wanted to join together different words from different cells that were the apple was on the tree. So we've got those in A1 all the way to A7. Okay, so text 1 is going to be cell A1. Text 2 is going to be a space in quotation marks or speech marks. Text 3 is going to be cell A2. Text 4 is going to be quotation marks space. Just to make sure that we get the space in there, because if you don't, then when you concatenate them, all the words will just be pushed together without any space between them. Okay. You can have lots and lots of arguments inside the concatenate function, so don't panic about running out of those. So again, with the same workbook, go to cell H11 and type first last. Then go to H12 and type equals concatenate of B12, H11, A12. And then you should see this showing up, Ortiz, David. Hit OK, and then copy that all the way down to cell H18. Now, the result's going to be incorrect here. The string is getting longer and longer on Ortiz is in every string. So if we go back to H12, in the formula bar, click the cell H11, and then we make that an absolute reference. So you can either hit F4, the function, or like the key on your keyboard, or just put dollars in front of the H and 11 to make sure that that doesn't move down. Hit enter and then drag that function down to cells H13 to 18. Now here's an example that I was talking about as well. So select I12 and type equals concatenate A12, comma, quotation marks with a space, comma, B12. So this has the first name in A, the second name in B, but it puts a space between them. Hit enter and then drag that down. So it should look something like this. So we've looked at conditional formulae to do summaries, so the sum if, count if, average if functions, conditional logic with if and or, and then formulas to modify text, the right, left, mid, upper, lower, proper, and concatenate. Now, to put together some of these skills into a more practical example, I've given you a file in Teams on sales data. Now, in Teams, I've also specified the steps that you need to take to work through this file and to do some summaries based on conditional arguments and some logic there. But there's also scope, if you finish it as well, to start to plan out what a report might look like if you had to give the head of sales or senior management a report and a write-up of what this data is telling you. Think of what information you'd want to go in there. I'm not asking you to write the report, but if you generated any figures or any statistics during your analysis that you think are important to get in there, then put them in and just copy and paste them. Don't worry too much about the presentation there, but I just want to get your impression of how you would write this into a report. And then we could talk about report writing skills later on in the bootcamp. Thanks for watching.